get the exciting job of introducing Minda. So for many of us, we can normalize trauma in our workplace. We live under this idea that we should be grateful to have a job, even if we feel sometimes personally attacked or undermined by our counterparts. We can ignore signs of racism, sexism, microaggressions, and other forms of inequality, and we can brush our feelings under the rug to avoid conflict or correction. Minda Harts is helping individuals and leading leaders to heal the workplace and create a workplace that works for everyone. She is a workplace and equity consultant. She is also the best-selling author and award-winning author of The Memo, Right Within, and most recently, You Are More Than Magic. And I know there weren't numbers attached with that, but it's almost 3 books in 3 years, which is incredible. Minda is a highly sought after speaker for companies such as Liberty Mutual, Nike, Google, Salesforce, and others. And in 2020, she was named the top voice for equity in the workplace by LinkedIn. Minda also hosts a live weekly podcast called Secure the Seat. So you should check that out. But it's my pleasure to introduce Minda. She's going to be leading us in a conversation and then some interactive activities where people can actually get some live coaching from her later in the session. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned for the prompt. But Minda, I turn it over to you. It is a true pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Kathryn, and to the team here. Just so honored. I had the pleasure of being connected to Jeremy through Kim Scott, and it's just been a pleasure. Now he's stuck with me. So of course, now you all hopefully will be stuck with me too. But
happy to
yes. But my name is Minda Harts, really honored that you all are here today. You could be anywhere on the internet right now and you're here with us, so I don't take that lightly. I am in Sacramento. I'm doing some speaking in real life here, and so I'm just honored again. I believe in origin stories. We all kind of have this crossroads moment where we start our journey, and we have this moment where some of us will say, you know what, I think that there's more. I think that I deserve more. And I had that moment in 2014. And so I want to kind of tell you how we even get to this idea around healing the workplace. And for some of you, when you first saw, workplace trauma, you probably thought, oh, that whoever's dealing with that, I feel sorry for them, right? But at some point, we probably have all experienced some sort of inequality in the workplace. And what happens is we normalize that treatment. So I know for me, as a Black woman in the workplace, I used to say, well, that's just how it is for Black women in the workplace. So I normalized how I was experiencing the workplace, not equitably at all turns. And so I normalized it. But once I realized that I do deserve humanity, dignity, equity, and respect in the workplace, my outlook changed so much. And so I hope that you will join us in thinking about some of those experiences that maybe you've pushed under the rug and that you've settled into, and allow yourself to be free. One definition of freedom is no longer feeling confined. So if you felt confined in the workplace, I hope that you will think about what freedom looks like for you. And if you feel pretty free in the workplace, I hope that you will think about what it looks like to help free your colleagues, right? To help build trust, to help restore humanity inside of the workplace. And as leaders, because we all are leaders in some facet, we all have the capacity to do that if we want to. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. And then, as Kathryn said, we'll have some interactive time here. But it was in 2003 where I graduated college. Now all of you kind of know how old I am, so don't tell anybody. I entered into the workplace as a first generation college student, first person in my family to graduate from college and enter into a corporate role. And I was so excited about that because I knew how much that could change the way I had experienced the work, the way of life up until that point. And so I entered into corporate America as the only Black woman in my company out of hundreds. And I didn't realize how isolating that would be, being the only. One of my first managers, we'll call him Chad, he said, he saw that I had burnt orange fingernail polish on, and he said, you people love your bright colors. And he joked around for 15 minutes about how Black people like bright colors. This was my manager, right? So I would go on to hear those types of comments several times a day. And the story that I started to tell myself was, I guess he doesn't mean any harm because everybody else is saying that same thing, right? So clearly, Chad isn't racist, he's not sexist, he's all those things because all these other people in the workplace who are not a Black woman are telling me that that's not what it is, right? So I didn't have anyone to affirm my experience. This is my experience. And so I just started to tell myself the same thing. Oh, that's just Chad being Chad. But I didn't realize how damaging those things would be inside the workplace for me later on. So what I ended up doing was settling into the bias, right? I settled into microaggressions. I settled into bias. And it wasn't until 2012 where I started to think differently about the experiences I was having as the only Black woman in the workplace. And for those who've never been the only of anything, it's very isolating. You often really have to walk on eggshells so that nobody calls you the feisty Latina or the docile Asian or the angry Black woman, all these different stereotypes, when others get to assert themselves into the career narrative as taking the initiative, right? Or, wow, don't they have some self-advocacy? And so you don't get to experience the workplace the same as everyone else. And the one thing that I want to tell you all is, if you don't get anything that I say today, is we might all work at the same place, but we could possibly experience that workplace differently. So there are colleagues that have probably worked with me who will say, oh no, racism doesn't exist here, because they've never been me in the workplace. So that has never been their experience. But two things can be true at the same time. Someone may never experience those inequalities, but then others experience them every single day. So the goal isn't to call somebody racist or sexist or homophobic or something like that. It's about, how do we eliminate this barrier so that nobody is experiencing that inequality in the workplace, right? And I think we get in our feelings sometimes because we don't want to be called racist or we don't want to be called anyist, right? But what we should be thinking about, how do I remove this barrier so that nobody's experiencing this behavior? And so it wasn't until 2012 where I saw a demonstration taking place outside of my office window, and it was a Black Lives Matter protest. And it was the first time that I had heard about Black Lives Matter. And it really got me thinking, what could Black Lives Matter mean inside the workplace? Meaning, what could it mean for me as a Black woman to experience the workplace the way my colleagues are, right? To see myself in the boardroom, to see myself with equal pay, right? To see myself on the About Us pages. I never got to experience that. And some of us take that for granted because we always get that, right? I didn't have any mentors or sponsors that looked like me when I was in my career. And so I started to think about and interrogate and investigate, what could it look like for the workplace to work for everybody, not just a few people, right? We can do so much more. We can innovate at such a higher level if the workplace was working for everybody. But at that time in 2012, I didn't really know what to do, right? I didn't think that I had a voice to be able to address this. I, at the time, I don't even know that I was on social media. Maybe I was and had like 2 followers, and I just was one of those like lurkers. I never really tweeted, like just kind of looking around. And I didn't think that my voice mattered. But the one thing that I realized at that time was that I have a voice. I just had to decide how I wanted to use it. And I started to interrogate and investigate what it could look like for the workplace to work for people who look like me. And at the time, again, I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew that I deserved better. One of my favorite authors, her name is Audre Lorde. She's now moved on to the next life. But she had a quote that really sustained me while I was in corporate America. And it said, "Beware of feeling you're not good enough to deserve it." And I kept telling myself that I deserved better. I deserved that humanity, that dignity, that equity, even if no one else thought I did, right? Or if no one else wanted to acknowledge that the workplace doesn't work the same for everybody. And so in 2012, I ended up leaving my current company where I'd been at for a long time. And I said, well, maybe it's another environment. Maybe I can't control how these people are operating, but maybe I could find a new place to work, right? And maybe this will give me an opportunity to be able to experience the workplace differently, right? To be able to do the best work of my career, because that's all I ever wanted to do, right? And so I take an opportunity and I find a new job, and I move from one coast to the other. And this particular company said that diversity was important to them, right? That was something that I had never heard at any other place I had worked, that inclusivity was important. And so they said all of the things that I needed to hear, right? Because that wasn't language that we were really heavily talking about in 2012, 2013. And so I take this new role and I enter into this new company. And again, I already knew what that felt like. So I'm like, okay, well, I know there's some growing pains that happen along that way, but they're saying these things that I didn't hear before. So let me try it out, right? And so while I'm in this situation, it actually turns out to be worse than what I just left. I would be in meetings where people wouldn't even call me Minda. They would say, "What does the Black girl think?" and think that that was funny. And I had to continue on in the meeting like nothing to see here, right? I had to continue to do that because, again, if I were to say something or challenge somebody, then I'm the person that's causing the problems. I had been walking on eggshells at this point for 13 years, and I didn't realize how damaging that was to me. And so one of the things that I thought about was the word courage. And one definition of courage is the ability to do something that frightens one. And while I'm experiencing this additional inequality that I had at this point, my whole career had been that, unfortunately. But again, I just thought that this is just the way it is. And so for about a year, things just kept getting worse. And I kept thinking, if I show up earlier, if I stay later, if I bring Bob the red velvet cupcakes, maybe that would change the way that people saw me and worked with me. But toxic is toxic, right? And there was nothing that I could do to change that system. But at the time, I didn't know that. But one thing, again, I had told you when I was in my last environment, I started to see the power of my voice. I thought that I didn't have a voice, but we all have a voice. We just have to decide how we want to use it. And so in that environment, I thought about self-advocacy. I can't change the way that people show up, but I can create boundaries for how people are engaging with me. At the time, I didn't understand what all that meant, but I got enough courage to go and have a conversation with the most senior woman at the company. And I said, you know what? You see that these inequalities are taking place. I need your support. I need your help. Can you partner with me to change this? Because I really like my job, but it's just, I can't work under these dynamics. It's just too toxic. And at that point, it took so much courage for me to go and have a conversation with her because I didn't want to call it racism. I knew what saying that word out loud, I knew what that meant for Black and brown people when they use that language in the workplace. So I was really fearful. So I never called it that. I just said I'm experiencing these inequalities, right? Because I knew that I had to be careful with how I spoke about it. And so she said to me, and at that point I was experiencing depression, anxiety. I gained a lot of weight, but I didn't know that it was because of a toxic work environment. I thought that it was just me. I thought something was wrong with me. And I get a little emotional about it now because so many people still experience that and they couldn't articulate it. And at the time I didn't know how to articulate it. And I took that energy and I had that conversation with her, and she could not meet me with the same courage. She chose caution over courage. And that's the thing that I'll continuously talk about today is courage, because it takes courage to change status quo. It takes courage to heal the workplace. And I get so many messages from women and men and all sorts of people about their experiences in the workplace. And it hurts me that we're still having these conversations and if we're all courageous, somebody could benefit from it, right? And so I'm not crying tears of sadness, really. I'm really crying tears of joy because I found my way eventually. And I hope that many of you who have experienced that will be inspired as well. Normally I don't need tissue when I cry, but we're doing it. But we're a small family here today, so I feel comfortable doing that. But I had the conversation with her. She said, Minda, I realize that these things are taking place, but she's been here a very long time, the person that was causing a lot of this trouble for me inside the workplace. In my books, I call her Carrie. And she said, so, you're just going to have to figure out if you want to work here or not. Now, you're doing a really great job, so I hope you can figure it out, but she's not leaving. I said to her, you know what? I don't want Carrie to leave. I just want to be treated like everybody else, right? With respect, dignity, and equity. I want to be able to do my job just like she's doing her job without all of the anxiety and depression, etc. But she wasn't able to see me in that moment. And I often thought, and that was 2014, I often thought, had I been a different color, maybe she would have seen my humanity. But she wasn't able to do that. And so even though I met her with courage, she met me with caution. She wasn't willing to change the way that the workplace worked for everybody. She was allowing it to still stay the same. And so I remember leaving her office, telling myself on a reel, Minda, don't cry, Minda, don't cry, because I didn't want to cry in that moment. I had been the strong Black woman my entire career at that point, never letting people see me sweat. And that did me no favors, okay? It just made people assume that I must be happy because I have this great smile and I'm always smiling, right? But I learned to smile through the pain. I learned to smile through the inequity. And that was the only way that got me through getting to 6 or 7 or however long I was working that day. And so I'll never forget, it was 2014. I walk out of her office, I go grab my stuff at my desk and I walk to my car. It's on a Friday afternoon. And I get to my car and I break down. It was the first time that I had cried about it. And not just what she said, but what every other manager didn't say, what every other colleague didn't say when they saw those things happening to me and didn't say anything. You know, I always had to fight for myself or not fight at all and just sweep it under the rug. And I cried because it hurt, right? I had all these allies that worked with me. I had all of these people that were my work friends, but when it came down to it, no one was willing to be courageous. And so I sat in that car and I cried that day, a cry that I had never experienced before. And I thought to myself, what can I do to make the workplace better than I found it? Because I know so many people will go to the bathroom or they'll go to a certain place and they'll experience these workplace traumas, right? It may not be racial, but it might be gender, it might be identity, it might be class, it might be age, right? It might be being a parent. We all experience these certain inequalities in the workplace. And I sat in that car that day, and as I was crying, I thought about courage, the ability to do something that frightens one. And I thought about my great-grandmother. She used courage when she left the Jim Crow South during the Great Migration. She left New Orleans and she moved to Los Angeles, California, so that my grandmother would have a different way of living. She used courage because she understood segregation and she didn't want her daughter to have to experience that. She took that courage because she knew that my grandmother would be a beneficiary of it. I thought about my grandmother when she was living in California and she had 5 daughters, one of which was my mother. She was living in one of the worst projects in Los Angeles at the time. She had 5 girls. She was a single mother of 5 girls. And she said, I want my daughters to have better than I do. She leaned into her courage and moved to the suburbs where all of her daughters were able to graduate from high school, something that her and my great-grandmother never got to do. It was courage. I thought about my mother. She was 17 when she had me. She could have stopped school, but she decided to have the courage to have me at 3 pounds. I fit in the palm of the nurse's hand. 3 pounds, and she finished her high school degree. That took courage. I sat in my car that day and said, I am a beneficiary of these women's courage. Who is going to be a beneficiary of my courage? And I thought about the workplace and I said, I'm going to use my voice. Now in 2014, I had no idea what that looked like, but I said, I want a generation to be a beneficiary of my courage, meaning that the workplace will work differently, that we no longer have to work inside a system that is harming people, but what would it look like to heal a system, right? That's so dynamic. Like we have the power to do that if we all lean into our courage and push aside our caution. And I thought, who will be a beneficiary of my courage? Or will I just, make it work? And then we keep, each generation keeps experiencing these inequalities. And in 2014, again, I did not know what that looked like, but I knew that I had suffered a lot of workplace trauma, but I didn't know how to articulate that at the time. And so it wasn't until the next year, where I still was working in that environment because I wasn't in a position where I could just quit, right? Some of us, we can't just quit. And so I had to figure out how to make work for me. And I started to look at work differently. I started to create boundaries. I started to let people know what good looks like to me. And in those moments, then I started my company, The Memo, in 2015. It was a company helping women of color prepare for their seat at the table and talk about the inequalities that we face, but how we move forward, right? That we don't just have these conversations, but what does action look like? And then in 2019, my first book, The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table, came out and it became a best-selling book. It was the first book about women of color in the workplace by a major publisher, if you could believe that. When I sat in that car in 2014, if you told me that I would have been writing a book talking about the experiences of women of color, not just for us to be seen in the career narrative, but for managers and leaders to say, wait a second, I had no idea that this was someone else's experience. We'd been working at the same place, but having a different experience than each other. And now I can show up differently, right? And we're no longer having this taboo conversation, but we're pulling all those things from under the rug and putting them on top of the rug to say, let's deal with it. Let's talk about race, right? For so long in the workplace, many people of color prior to the murder of George Floyd don't talk about race, don't make it about race. You took it the wrong way. We never got a chance to even say it. So our voices were suppressed. And now we're in an environment where we can have these conversations a little more easier. I know not everybody's comfortable having them, but we can't conquer what we're not willing to name. We can't conquer racism if we don't say it out loud. We can't conquer sexism if we don't say it out loud. We can't conquer ageism if we don't say it out loud. It's Pride Month. We can't conquer homophobia if we don't say it out loud, right? And so it was very important for me to start to say it out loud. And the memo became a bestseller. Then I had the opportunity. I thought about all the inequalities that people face for years and decades. And I thought about that trauma. Erykah Badu said in her famous song, Bag Lady, one day all those bags gonna get in your way, so pack light. I wanted us to learn how to pack light. You can't, Maya Angelou said, you can't you can't solve, or you can't fix, you can't control what the experiences that you've had, but you can control if you'll be defined by them. And I no longer want us to be defined by the workplace traumas. That's why we have to talk about them. We have to have managers who understand that equity is not an option, it's mandatory. We have to have courage in the workplace, right? Because who's going to benefit from our courage? The next generation gets to benefit or they don't, right? But we are at a time right now in our careers, in our country, where courage can be a benefit and we can change the way that the workplace works for everyone. So I wrote my next book, Right Within, How to Heal from Racial Trauma in the Workplace, because so many people were normalizing workplace, bad workplace and toxic workplaces and just saying this is the way it is. And I'm saying we don't have to do that. And then my latest book just came out April 5th. I thought about us as adults, but then I thought about the youth. What did I need to hear at 15? What did I need to hear at 13? What did I need to hear at 21? And I wrote You Are More Than Magic, the Black and Brown Girls Guide to Finding Your Voice. But not only did I write it for the next generation that will be leaders and some of our managers probably, I wrote it so that parents of aspiring allies could all, and teachers and educators can also understand what it's like to show up and be one of the few or the only in a classroom, how to have difficult conversations. Because let's be honest, many of us have a really hard time talking about some of the things that I've mentioned today, but we can't pretend that it's going away. Those issues will never go away if we don't confront them, if we don't all work together in this way. And so I just want to thank Jeremy and Kathryn and the whole team for having this conversation, because we can no longer pretend that these inequalities are happening and not do anything, right? So the last thing I'll say is something I hope you'll write down, you'll put a sticky note around: who will be a beneficiary of your courage? And because I decided to use my voice, I had a voice, I just had to decide how to use it. I didn't know that I'd be an author. I didn't know that I'd be on MSNBC. That was never in my, was never a goal of mine. My goal was just to make the workplace better than I found it. And if you think about it, Kathryn said it, in 3 years, I wrote 3 books. During 2020, I wrote 2 books at the same time, Right Within and You Are More Than Magic. So if just in a few years time span, think about how my courage has been a benefit to the workplace. Think about what your courage could be to the workplace to change status quo. And so together, I can't do it by myself. Success is not a solo sport. I need each and every one of us to lean into our courage and push aside our caution and not let equity be optional. It has to be mandatory. Thank you so much.
Oh, wow, Minda. Yeah, it's like if you want to turn off your mute and clap or put something in chat. There's just been verbal pouring of resonance, emotion, of thanks, appreciation, definitely a lot of empathy. The stories that have already come up in chat and the +1s in all of the emotional directions, I think, to have me kind of, I don't know, I guess in just a moment, a little speechless, which doesn't happen to me very often as an extrovert. Okay, so we have a little bit of time, like very precious time with Minda to get some of her responses to questions, but also to live coaching with folks that would be comfortable sharing. Minda, as I kind of chat here or help direct a little bit, if you'd like to browse chat as well. I've just had an
Yes.
outpouring privately and publicly in the chat for people that would like to share or be willing to share. Maybe we might have time to even do two. So if you haven't written something in chat and you're thinking, oh, this would be my moment to have someone be courageous, help me be courageous, do put that in chat. I see a bunch of things coming in. I'm going to rely on some of my teammates here to also help pull one. I think I have one to start with, Minda, if you're browsing
Okay.
and you see one that you'd like to.
Can I say one quick thing, Kathryn, real quick, is before we get started in this, I also want to say, I should have said it at the top of the hour, but I know that this can be triggering for some people, our conversation today. And so I want to also hold space for that, because maybe some of you didn't even realize some things you had suppressed, right? Or you've been part of someone's trauma, not intentionally, but the impact is that, right? So today we get to reset and take your time. This is a safe space, not just because I'm saying that, because I'm going to demonstrate safety to you, which is different than what I think a lot of companies are saying. And so I just want to thank you for your courage, because saying it out loud is also part of healing. Healing is not a one-time event, it's a lifestyle. So I hope that I hope you will get the books, read them, even if you haven't experienced trauma, because I guarantee someone you work with or that works for you has experienced it. And thank you, Kathryn.
Yeah, of course. I'll let you browse a little bit here, but I think maybe while you're browsing, I will select somebody who reached out, Mariana, if you're willing to share a little bit. I think Mariana had a moment with your book and a first courageous step she took, but maybe looking for a little bit more as she moves through that. Mariana, are you comfortable sharing with us? I see you have your video on, so I suppose that's a good sign.
Yes. Hi, I'm Mariana. I live in the Boston area. I was for around 4 years the only non-white, non-American in a work group. Even though it was a big company, like in different countries and all, there was only like white people and mostly white men in the group. I'm from Brazil, and a lot of microaggressions came from like the fact that I'm not from here, or because they assume stuff from Brazilian women. We are overly objectified, just like it happens too with Black women in this country. But anyway, I think because of, like you said, views come. So for a long time, I try to like pretend that this was not happening to me because of documentation and paperwork. I could not leave that job. And after I received my documentation, I started thinking what I wanted to do next. And I really wanted to tap into the D&I area. I was doing a lot of unpaid work in D&I, as I was the only diverse person in the group. So I was doing the whole D&I thing for free. And I didn't realize how bad this was being for me. Until I read your book. I don't even know how I came across your book. Maybe it was LinkedIn, because I'm a LinkedIn crazy. And then I read your book, and 2 days after I finished your book, there was a company-wide message from the CEO that triggered me, and I cried for like a whole day. I had a breakdown, talked to HR. And like after a month, I resigned. Thank God I found another job, because I could not afford not having a job. But I think the main thing is that like I knew I was broken, and I didn't understand why until I read your book and I could relate to your stories and see what was happening to me. It was unfortunately not rare. And there was a name. I was recently diagnosed with PTSD because of what happened. And but now, even though now I'm in a very healthy work environment with lovely people, and finally I have a Black woman as a boss, which I love. She's incredible. But still, every so often, things that happen in the workplace kind of bring back some stuff. And I'm like scared of saying something, or so how to deal with that, like how to not like bring that bad experience and kind of poison my good thing that is happening right now. Because that separation, it's pretty recent too, because I've left like 5 months ago, and I'm doing therapy. I'm trying like my best. I have very supportive work team, but how to separate. And again, thank you very much. I sent you, I think, a LinkedIn message as soon as I finished your book, because it was very transformative to me. I've given it as a gift to countless people, including at my office. So I'm really appreciative. Thank you for being you.
Well, thank you, Mariana, for having the courage to share your story here, because I know your story is a lot of other stories. So thank you. That's healing, just what you've done, right? That's part of the healing journey, and that's helping others as well. And I think also talking about it, it allows us to also let our colleagues know that these aren't one-time experiences. These aren't isolated events, right? These are things that people are dealing with even during working from home, right? These things didn't go away because now many of us are working from home. They only sometimes exacerbated behaviors. And so I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I think what's really important is our maintenance. And you mentioned something, PTSD, for those who might not know, post-traumatic stress disorder. When you experience any type of trauma, it doesn't just go away, right? So for example, I was in my former life for 15 years. I experienced trauma every single day. That didn't just go away, right? I'm not completely healed. That's why I say it's a journey. I practice healing each and every day. But the one thing that I think is so important is that because we have been exposed to traumas, when we do get a new opportunity, or we get a new boss, or whatever this situation may, or new colleagues, sometimes we have so much trauma that when we get into a new environment, we think that those people are the same people that we just left. So we can't enjoy the experience because we're still held captive. That's why freedom is so important. No longer feeling confined. For a very long time, when I left my previous employer, I talk about a woman named Carrie in both of my books, The Memo and Right Within. And when I went to a new environment, when I left that place, I was still having panic attacks about looking at my Outlook inbox, because I used to get a lot of aggression in email. So when I got to my new location, I would be afraid to open up my inbox, because I was so used to experiencing this with Carrie that I thought she might pop up, right? I'd be at client sites and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm going to run into this woman. And if I see her, what am I going to say? I let her take control of my experience because I was so harmed. Right. And I didn't realize how it was harming me. But what I had to do is let that go. I had to allow myself, what you're doing, to heal so that I don't bring that, because let's be honest, many of us still have a long way to go in our working careers. Right. And so we can't keep being like on the lookout, like a horror movie, waiting for that call at every turn. Right. We have to release it so that we can experience the joy, the equity, the humanity that we should have all had from the get-go, right? And I want that for you. I want that for everyone. And the fact that you're acknowledging that these characters have changed, right? And even if you do experience some inequality, it doesn't mean that you have to be worried that it's going to happen. And so that's what I really want all of us to know. What are the tools that we need to continue our healing journey? For some of us, it might be therapy. It might be life coaching. It might be reading books, right? It might be having accountability partners coming to sessions like this to remind us that we have to give people a clean slate. Like I had a lot of toxic managers, but I couldn't treat every toxic manager like the last. I had to allow them space and grace and allow myself to build relationships. And so the other thing I'll say to those listening, if there has been some mistrust or distrust, it's really important that you also understand the environment in which you're holding. We can say that an environment is equitable and diverse, but if we're not demonstrating safety, then nobody is safe, right? And so I think it's really important for us, even if we are not Black or brown or on the margins, to read books like these so that we understand how to show up for people, because we might say, oh, Mariana, why is she acting like this? But we don't know that she's just come from a really hellacious situation, right? And so I think having mental health practitioners on staff, having certain things that help us talk these things through are very important. And so continue to use your tools. Healing is a lifetime journey. It's not a one-time event. So you might be feeling that, but I think it's important to understand, let me reset, right? This isn't Carrie, right? Her name might be Kim, but she's not Carrie, right? Let me give Kim the space to show up how she needs to, right? And then the other part of that is something that I didn't do in my former life was say what I mean without saying it mean. So when I do come across situations that may be a little triggering for me, and part of my healing is understanding what my triggers are so that I'm not constantly held captive by my triggers. So once you understand what those triggers are, for me, it was team meetings, because those were where things were said egregiously. Again, the intention might not have been that, but the impact was that on me. And so now I give myself permission to have conversations with people. You know what, Tim, I noticed that in the last meeting, you said X, Y, and Z. I understand that might not have been your intention, but this is how it landed on me. And so I wanted to make you aware of it, right? I can't control how they receive it, but I can control the boundaries in which I set. And I think if we normalize difficult conversations in the workplace, then they become normal, right? And that nobody has to be fearful and walking on eggshells at every turn. But we can say what we mean without saying it mean, but we have to, if we know what our triggers are, making sure that we create the boundaries in order to address them so that they don't linger and cause more trauma later down the road. So continue to use your tools because we all need our tools. Again, success is not a solo sport. That's why I use all the tools necessary, some days more than others. So wishing you the best, and thank you so much for taking time to talk with us.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Sharing. Yeah, people are putting hearts and things in chat. You'll definitely have to read it. One thing we like to do for folks that kind of go out on a limb during MOC, I saw Jeremy doing it actually a little. If you put your view in gallery mode, we can do our fireworks applause. Maybe we'll call them courage applause in this case. So thanks, Mariana, for sharing. I think we might have time for one more, Minda, if you're game for it, and then do a couple of questions to wrap. Jay Brown, I'm sorry, don't think I know your first name. Sounds like a lot of people have been +1ing your feelings and experience in chat, and a lot of people already supporting you. Would you feel comfortable sharing? Is it okay that we bring you to the front here? It's like maybe we already have.
Sure. Oh my God, it's such an honor to share space with you, Minda, and everyone. So I'm very appreciative to be here. From my job last week, I was threatened. Boss gossiped to me and said, if you tried to put me on a PIP, said I was causing all these problems, even though I'd never had any sort of indication that there had been any problems. I was told that all of my colleagues have problems with me. When I asked what the problems were, they said it's up to the colleagues if they want to share that. So, it was just one thing after another. I was one of 3 professional faculty of color. And so I resigned, and I don't have a job. I don't have anything lined up, but I just have faith that the universe will provide, and that, God definitely, I was sitting at my desk crying, telling myself, just keep grinding, just keep your head down, just keep doing it. And God tapped me on the shoulder and was like, but you don't have to do this anymore. And so it was really powerful to get that message. And I also recognize the privilege of being able to walk away without having a job lined up. So I definitely recognize that. And then I just shared in the chat that instead of a in-person exit interview, I decided to get the questions and type up my answers. And it turned out to be 6 pages. They probably won't read it, but it was really healing and cathartic for me to just process and get it all out, and hopefully be able to move forward into my next opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. It took a lot of courage for you to do all of that. So we're going to do the courage clap. We're going to give the applause because, it takes a lot. And when I talked about it earlier, who's going to be a beneficiary of our courage? When we stay and try to make everything work, the system can't change, right? So sometimes we have to be the ones to leave to show them, oh, we can't retain Black and brown women or women of color or whomever. I wonder what that is, right? And I think now we're at a position in our careers where we do have options, right? We do have choices, and we have to also prioritize our mental health, because if mental health is compromised, then we can't do our best work. Then and also the other part of this is, why is healing so important? The healing that you're starting is because those people that love us the most don't get the best of us when we're harmed. Right. So I realized that, no, I wasn't being the angry Black woman at work, but I sure as hell was being angry at home. Right. People were not getting the best of me, the best version of me. I wasn't getting to meet the best version and the healthiest version of myself. Right. Because what happens when we take those toxic traits from one job to the next, we start being toxic in certain ways, right? Not saying that for you, but healing is not just for us, it's for everyone connected to us, right? And so I appreciate that you said, you know what, I deserve better. I mentioned the Audre Lorde quote at the beginning, beware of feeling you're not good enough to deserve it. You deserve a space. And I always really am apprehensive about anyone who says that people are having trouble with you when they can't give you an example of how they're having trouble. So that's a red flag. You know, we talk about in dating, red flags. Dating is like workplaces too. When you see those red flags, you got to figure out, do I stay or do I go, right? And I think it's important to look at that and realize that this is not me, that's them. This is this system. You're never going to control it. And if people are always nitpicking and they can never tell you what it is you've done wrong and base it in fact, that actually is tied to the bottom line, not just because we like you or we don't like you type of things, that doesn't mean anything. And that's toxic. And that's detrimental to us, because then we start to question ourselves and question our worth, right? And so it's so important that I'm so happy that you realize that now, that you don't have to spend the rest of your career walking on eggshells, being mentally compromised, right? Now, the next environment that you enter gets the better version of you. You get to experience the best version of you. And so I know that, you said God, so I'm going to believe that you are a believer. And so I know that you're going to have what you need, exactly what you need, the way that it is, and all those experiences that have caused you trauma, you will get it back 100-fold. You will get the manager, you will get the position, you will get the title, you will get the money, you will get all the things that you deserve in an environment where you can thrive and not just survive. And at the end of this, it's really important that we create workplaces where people can thrive and not just survive, right? And that's what equity is. And so I know without a shadow of a doubt, you're going to look at me. You know what I'm saying? Like, listen, I tell people, if I can do it, trust me. If I can do it and find my way, we might all do it differently, but your healing is on the other side. You're in it. And so I'm excited for your next steps, because you get to be a healthy you. You know, the workplace talks about being our authentic self, but what I really want us to shift into is being our healthiest self. Because if I'm my healthiest self at work, then I'm going to show up with my authentic self as well. And so I'm just wishing you nothing but success. And I'm rooting for your continued healing.
Thank you so much. So much.
Wow. Yeah. Second round of courage applause, or fireworks courage. Thanks so much for sharing. I appreciate that. So courageous. Let's see here, Minda, I've got a question in chat that I'm excited to pull forward that some people have asked to be asked.
So yeah, this is something that's sort of been difficult to address, how do I address someone who is part of the minority community, for instance, someone who's Black, who starts declaring that somebody else's success is because that other person is that minority, for instance, they're Black. I just feel that racism from minorities is just as toxic and can be just as hurtful as racism from non-minorities. And I just like to get your views on, how can I fight that without, just how can we fight that?
Yeah, thank you for stating that. I'm glad that we created space to have that question asked, because, toxic environment isn't colored, right? People can be toxic no matter how they identify, no matter how old they are, what race, ethnicity, etc. Single, married, partnered, whatever have you. People can be toxic. That's just plain and simple. And so the same energy that we would talk with maybe, a white colleague or someone else, you should have that same kind of conversation with someone who might look like you or identify similarly. Because if we're going to create safety, then we have to hold everybody to a higher standard, right? If our core values inside the workplace is equity, then we have to hold everybody. It can't be optional for anybody to be equitable, right? And I think the one thing that has harmed the workplace is that sometimes we give a pass to people who look like us or other marginalized groups. So we never have the conversations that we need to have with them, because you also have to understand they've been in a system as well. And so they've been indoctrinated into this survival kind of mode and there's some healing that they need to do. And unfortunately, we can't say, hey, you need to heal, right? But what we can do is we can create boundaries with them as well, right? And I think that's part of the courageous conversation, us normalizing adults having conversation with other adults so that we we're not calling or shaming someone, but the goal is to remove a barrier, right? So what is that barrier? But I think it's important for us, no matter who they are, to say what we mean without saying it mean, and let people know, because once you address that elephant in the room, that person will move differently with you. They just will. But if we never address these things, then people won't know. One of the things that I found when I do a lot of consulting work and speaking at companies, and I'll have managers say to me, well, I don't think that's happening here, Minda, because our women are smiling all the time on Zoom or blah, blah, blah. Just because someone didn't say it to you doesn't mean that they're not experiencing inequality. It wasn't safe enough for them to say it is probably the main reason why you haven't heard them say it, right? And I think that this is partially that. We have to start having these conversations. Nobody gets a hall pass for bad behavior, right? That's not equitable, right? This isn't for me, it's not a Black or white thing or an Asian thing or a Latinx thing. This is a humanitarian issue. How do we heal the workplace so that everybody can do the best work of their career? And part of equity is not musical chairs, right? My goal in these conversations is not to push all the white men out of positions. It's to create a longer table with more seats, right? So that everybody has an opportunity to thrive in the workplace. And I think when we talk about equity, we have to create longer tables and we have to hold everyone accountable. Otherwise, it's never going to be a safe environment if we're just saying, well, I can't talk to them because they're this, right? No, everybody should be creating, because you know what? There's plenty of toxic workplaces that those people can go work at. So they need to find them a new place to go. Respectfully.
Thank you.
I love it. Man, this phrase, say what you mean without saying it mean, is so resonating. It's such a graceful example of that too in so many cases here already. Thanks for sharing, Soli. I appreciate having you on Voice. It's so nice to have so many folks come be a part of this.
This has been a healing space for me as well. And I hope that others have found that as well. And I just want to lean back in and say, you have a voice. You just have to decide how you want to use it and who's going to be a beneficiary of your courage, right? And we benefit, but then there's also someone else who does too. And it doesn't mean you have to do the grand act. It's small acts of courage that change toxic workplaces. And so I just want to lean into that. The last thing that I want to read to you all is I want to read something from Right Within, because I think this is important. One of the aspects is not just healing ourselves, but also holding our leadership and managers accountable. And there's something in the book that I included called the Manager's Pledge. And I hope that you will purchase the book for your colleagues, have a reading club, all of those sorts of things. But if nothing else, you can go to my website and print out the Manager's Pledge, because this is something that I think all managers, even if we're not a manager, we're still a leader in the workplace. We can all strive to do better. And I'll quickly read it. I will acknowledge that I have biases that I need to understand and reconcile. I will commit to engaging in courageous conversations. They might sometimes be difficult, but I know they are necessary to create an inclusive workplace. I will challenge myself to hold other colleagues accountable when I have heard or observed racialized tones, behaviors, and actions. And we can insert whatever behavior, not just racialized there. I will learn to humanize the experiences of all my colleagues and seek to understand and listen to their perspectives and lived experiences, particularly when they differ from my own. I will share my experiences and educational journey to help other managers and employees create restorative justice practices. Even if I make a mistake, I will commit to the daily practice of being a better manager or colleague who is committed to equity for all. And my favorite one of the Manager's Pledge is, even if I make a mistake, because we all will make a mistake. We might say the wrong thing. We might misgender someone. We might have a bad day, right? Someone caught us at a bad time, but we will each and every day recommit to equity, because that's what creates safety for all people. And so I just want to thank you all again for the opportunity to have this conversation. 2 years ago, we were not talking about this type of topic before. So thank you to Stanford D.school for saying, I never in my wildest dreams, when I cried in that car in 2014, I wouldn't have guessed I'd be talking about this today for sure. So think about the power of courage. Think about, you deserve a workplace that works for you, but it takes that first step, right? So I all want us to think about what courage and what healing looks like for ourselves, but then also those things for our colleagues, right? So even if you feel like you may not have any healing to do, I know you know someone that you can share this with or get the book for, because we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to be their healthiest self. Thank you.